Joining us now, Shuwaski Young, candidate for Mississippi Secretary of State. Shuwaski, good to see you. How's it going today?
Gerard, how you doing this morning? It's going great. I tell you, up here in Neshoba County, it's a little rainy, but we're getting through it.
Yeah, I hear you. Raining across, I believe, the state of Mississippi. We were just talking about that. So I guess my first question is, what prompted you to throw your hat in the ring here to run for Secretary of State, and more specifically, how did you come to choosing that office? I felt like, given your candidacy for Congress for the 3rd District in this past November, that you likely would find yourself in another race. How'd you come up with this one?
Well, I'll tell you what, I started my career out at the Secretary of State's office when I was a senior at Jackson State University before I graduated. I was there as an intern in the Public Lands Division, and that was during the tenure of Dr. Eric Clark. And after graduation, I was hired as Director of Marketing and Training. That was in the Elections Division and the Education and Publications Division. And I kept that role for quite some time, and also worked under Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann for a stint as well at that particular office. So I've worked in 3 different divisions at the Secretary of State office. Earlier on in my political career, or governmental career, when I first started out, I know the office very well. Still know a lot of people who actually work there, care deeply about the particular state. And look, I'm a community organizer at hand first. I believe in giving people the information that they need to be able to be empowered to vote, knowing what those specific offices represent. And also, of course, making sure that we're managing our tax forfeited property and also our tide lands and the other areas of the Secretary of State, like charities and business services, properly. So I know a lot about the office. It's where I got my first start at. I've worked under both Democrats and Republicans. And, I thought long and hard about how I could continue to help this particular state. We didn't see the result that we wanted to see in the congressional race. And I did a lot of praying. I talked to you about that over the course of that end of that election. And look, I want to come back, let folks know that I'm here to stay, and that I'm committed to making sure that we move Mississippi forward in a very progressive fashion. And I mean progressive by saying advancing our state economically, advancing our state socially, and bringing more big business to our particular state and being on the top and not the bottom.
Okay. So you presently reside in Neshoba County. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And so how long have you been in Mississippi? Give us a little bit about your background there.
Sure. So I am a 5th-generation Mississippian, born, raised, educated right here in the particular state. Graduated from East Central Community College, graduated from Jackson State University, and spent my entire life here. And also have worked in different places around the country and always maintained residence right here in the state. The place that I love is which my heart has always been. And that was even something that I talked about in 2017 with East Central Community College when they featured me on their particular magazine for spring editions. So this is the state I love, the state I've always been a part of, the state that I want to represent statewide now.
If you were to be elected, Shuwaski, to the position, to the office of Secretary of State, what would be your priorities?
Well, one of the things that we have to do first and foremost is we have to be able to improve our election system here in the state. Look, in this last election, no matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, the bottom line is lowest voter turnout in the entire country during the 2022 election. Only about close to 33% of folks in Mississippi who were able to vote actually voted. Like, that is a failure on our actual part as a state, and as our electorate needs to be more informed about when these elections are, getting people more access to the ballot. That means making sure that we have early voting in this particular state. I know that's something that we're going to have to work with the state legislature in order to do. But I do believe folks out there want to make it easier for folks to vote and not harder. I want to make sure we also have proper online registration in our particular state, making sure that people have the ability to register to vote and making sure that it's easier to vote and not harder. Number 3, I want to make sure, absolutely make sure that we are managing our particular budgets, how we should be managing those particular budgets here in a particular state. What I'm talking about specifically is as it relates to charities in the Secretary of State's office. We all know that as our state auditor, White, has already said, he was on HBO Real-Time Sports last week or so, and he stated that this was the largest public fund scandal in the state of Mississippi's history. That's been under the watch of Republican leadership. And that's not to dog the Republican Republican Party out. That's to just be honest about what actually happened. When over $100 million are ill spent within our particular state, obviously it's time for new leadership. And Brett Favre is who I'm specifically talking about specifically. Look, the charities in which the Secretary of State's office manage specifically follow the auspice of those particular regulations of the Secretary of State. They have the right and also the duty to make sure that folks who are raising money for charities are spending that money accordingly to what that charity is actually looking for. So
Has
we
an
know.
investigation not been done already, though, by the Secretary of State, Michael Watson?
Well, look. One thing we know for sure is that people are not being prosecuted in this particular area. One thing we know for sure is that there is no accountability for the consequences or acknowledgement of consequences that have actually happened in this particular time. We haven't seen enough. The country hasn't seen enough. The people in North Mississippi, Central Mississippi, and South Mississippi definitely haven't seen enough. We want to make sure that people are being held accountable, and that's why when I announced my candidacy on the steps of the Capitol on January the 10th, what I said in that particular statement, and this went all over the country, picked up by AP and a lot of other folks, is on the first day of my office, I'm going to meet with the FBI, I'm going to meet with the United States Attorney, I'm going to meet with the state auditor, and we're going to open up a proper investigation to make sure we get to the bottom of what actually happened and that people are held accountable for it, and that we can restore trust within the communities here in Mississippi and also our national reputation. We owe that to the taxpayers of Mississippi.
So do you feel like that the investigation that's been conducted by Secretary of State Michael Watson has really not met the mark? You feel like there's something missing there, it's lacking, and
Look,
that you
I
need
think
to ratchet that up?
absolutely, I think it's lacking. When we look at what's actually happened, when we look at the facts that are at hand, when we look at the people who are involved, whether we're talking about Governor Tate Reeves, Phil Bryant, whether we're talking about people who are in the Secretary of State's office, like Michael Watson actually leads it, obviously they're not pushing this how they should be. If they did, we'd see more action and accountability actually happening. The people want to see that. The people deserve to see that. And I'm committed to making that happen if I'm Secretary of State. Look, this is not just because folks are Republican. No one's attacking anything. We owe the public good an opportunity to have justice in this particular area.
Let's go back to voting. It's obviously a major election's a major responsibility of the Secretary of State's office. So are you pleased with the present voting and elections process in Mississippi, other than the early voting, but let's say voter ID requiring photographic identification of the voter? Would you like to see that changed, strengthened, perhaps loosen
Well,
some of those restrictions? Where do you stand?
Look, I think that people need to be able to prove who they are. Look, election integrity is absolutely important. There's nothing wrong with people having to present an ID to actually go vote. Now, and I think that should be happening. I think that also when we're talking about how elections have been ran and what the current laws are in our particular state, look, we have election commissioners out there that are actually following the law that basically said, hey, if you have not voted in the last couple of elections because of this new law, we're purging you from the voter rolls. We saw that happen in African American communities where election commissioners who were African American, they purged those people. But there are over 10,000 folks who were purged as because of that in Mississippi. And a lot of folks in other communities were not purged. Why is that? Right? So we want to make sure that there's clear understanding of how elections should be ran. And look, this is what I used to do at the Secretary of State's office. When I was Director of Marketing and Training, part of my job was to go around the state along with the Attorney General's office and train the 410 election commissioners to get certified to run elections. That's literally what I did for a living. And I want to make sure that people who are running elections in our state know exactly what they're actually doing and how they should be doing, and making sure the standards that are put forth for people to be voting are adhered to. And I also want to make sure that poll workers who are spending time out of their busy schedules to do their duty to this country to help run those elections are paid a little bit more. And there have been past elections where, we didn't spend the proper amount of money that we could have spent relative to what other states were spending in order to get people who are there to be poll watchers and poll workers and things of that nature. I want to make sure that the state is giving all that they can for those folks who are willing to make that sacrifice for Mississippi.
So just want to go back to something you said, make sure I understand. Do you believe that there's been discrimination involved in purging of the rolls? If you want to hang around, we got a break right here, Shuwaski, and we can come back on the other side of that and continue that discussion.
Absolutely.
Okay. We've got Shuwaski Young. He's a candidate for Mississippi Secretary of State. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth Studios. We've got Mr. Shuwaski Young, a candidate for Mississippi Secretary of State. So we were just talking before we went to break there, Shuwaski, about trying to clean up the voter rolls. I get the sense from you that you believe that is a worthy effort, that's something that needs to be done. But I caught you mentioned that you thought perhaps that in practice there's been some discrimination where the black folks in the black communities have been, I guess, purged from the rolls at a greater rate than in white communities or non-black communities. Is that your contention?
My contention is that I believe that those folks who were election commissioners that were African American did their jobs. Is that they actually followed what the actual rules of the second training of the Secretary of State's office was to
Mm-hmm.
purge people from the voter rolls who um, had maybe not voted in the last couple of elections. That was their job. What I'm saying is that there is reason to believe that that didn't happen in other communities across the state. When you
Okay.
look at the amount of people who are registered on the rolls versus who are not, who are African American versus who are not, you see a clear disparity there. And that's something that we've looked at very closely. So we want to make sure that people are actually doing their jobs correctly. We want to make sure that people are there to be on the voter rolls, and they should be. Now, I don't even agree with the fact that we should be purging people from the voter rolls if they haven't voted in the last two elections. We don't know what the number of reasons for that was. And I think that's why something like early voting is so important in our particular state, that we have that we give people an opportunity to vote way ahead of deadline, way ahead of election day, to help with their schedules, whether they're nurses or teachers or folks who work on the road cleanups and things of that nature. We want to make sure that folks feel comfortable that they have an ample time to vote, and also that they're not missing elections. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. So would you support no excuse early voting? Because we do have a mechanism to early vote in Mississippi if you have a valid reason for it that you can provide, and you can vote. Or I've done it before. I've been out of town for various business purposes, and it's pretty straightforward, not that hard to do. So would you be in favor of no excuse early voting?
I'm in favor of early voting as a whole, giving people at least 45 days prior to the election to be able to go to their polling locations. It's like election day, just like other states have early voting. That way, we give people opportunity to have the highest advantage to go and vote. We shouldn't be putting people in positions to say, if you can't do it this way, then you can't go vote this way, or all these particular matters. We want to be able to expand the vote. And I think that that is something that the Republican Party knows. If we do that and our folks get an opportunity, and not just the African American community, but all folks who are hardworking blue collar workers every day, that don't have, always the ability to get out there on election day and vote, and may not qualify under one of the extenuating circumstances that allow you to go actually vote absentee. We want to make it easier, just like other states. And I think if we do that, we are doing our due diligence and our due diligence to hold up the Constitution and give people the right to vote for their equal and opportunity of representation.
Are you familiar with some examples, some real life examples of people who said, I wanted to vote, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get there on election day, and I didn't have a valid reason to vote early.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I think that oftentimes if you get out there and like I have in the community and you talk to folks about why they didn't go vote, look, you will hear the other examples of, man, I just don't feel my vote actually counts. But in often situations, look, there are people out there that just were not able to get off work and go vote. There were people out there that may have medical situations that came up on that particular day where they were not able to vote, that was unforeseen. And we need to be able to extend that particular opportunity and period of voting, where people have an opportunity to get out there and vote Monday through Saturday. It wouldn't be something that hasn't been done in other particular states. And I think that as a state of Mississippi, who has a record in the past in our dark history of voter suppression and voter oppression, that we want to be able to make the country see that, look, that's not who we are anymore. We want people to have access to the ballot in every way that they can, while we maintain the integrity of our free elections here in the state of Mississippi. And I think that's something that people who are willing and able to understand the dynamics that everyone has a different lifestyle that they're actually living on a daily basis, that they actually want to be able to exercise their right to vote in every way possible, whether that's a mail-in ballot, whether that's early voting, or even absentee voting for that particular matter. So I think that this is important for the state, especially with coming out of an election year where we just saw Mississippi have the lowest voter turnout in the entire country. Imagine what that would have been if we were a state like Georgia, or a state in other places that actually have early voting, where by the time we come into election night, hey, we have 20-30% of the electorate that has already voted and participated because they had the best opportunity and instance to participate in these particular elections. I think that's what Mississippi needs. I think that's what a lot of folks want. And those that probably don't want it know that if we give people the opportunity to vote in an expanded way, then they may not be in office. And that's probably kind of scary to us. I think we can all acknowledge that particular point.
It's so interesting to me because Georgia, the state of Georgia, was front and center to some degree with respect to alleged voter suppression, and they actually extended and expanding, as you indicated, the opportunity to vote in many situations, even greater than those in the deep blue states. Yet, in light of this last election, we still hear from the Democrats that voter suppression is still alive and well in the state of Georgia, yet they had substantial, if I'm not mistaken, record turnout. It just seems like it's never enough to me. And while I'm disappointed as you are that we had extremely low, the lowest in the country turnout, I'm not so sure in Mississippi, I'm not so sure it's because of the fact that without an excuse to vote early, you have to cast your vote on Election Day. I'd like to see more evidence that that's why. I think it's more a function of what you also mentioned, which is people just don't think their vote matters.
So I think that you have a great point there. I think that any time that we have advancements, we're also going to have anecdotal experiences or anecdotal situations where there's setbacks as well. Look, we have to be able to account as best we can for all that as leaders of the public good. I think here in Mississippi, depending on who you are, what your experience is, what your experience in America has been, what your experience in Mississippi has been, there is apprehension out there about people having the right to vote. And I think that we need to be able to alleviate that particular concern.
So hold on a second now. Wait a second. I got to stop you there. I apologize for interrupting you. So you think you're saying that there are people right here in the state of Mississippi that have shared with you that they are not sure whether or not they have the right to vote? I mean, that's what I heard you say there. Is that your position?
There are people here. There are people here in Mississippi that are, and this is a publication. There are 20 franchising crimes that are actual state law books that says that this will absolutely disenfranchise you from your right to vote. People are not sure about things like that, so they de facto don't go vote. Now, that is a issue that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and also our state share responsibility in, that we inform the public about how they can go vote and why they should be able to go vote, so we can minimize the agitation and the concern within the community so folks actually feel comfortable going to vote. I think that's absolutely a fact. And to discount that particular point, I think just denies, what the experiences of people in the state have been.
So are there any examples you could share? And I'm talking about in modern times where folks have been suppressed, intimidated, prohibited from exercising their right to vote, provided that they meet all the qualifications to vote. Are there some examples you can provide to us with that?
Sure. One of the immediate examples is that we can't control what employers actually do on their own jobs and privately owned businesses. If you have people in that particular workplace that clearly are voting one specific way, and this is open, that this is a particularly known as a red state, and that that you're going to actually go out there and vote for someone who is in opposition to that particular candidate, and they know that you are as well too, there is an immediate feeling of anxiety about whether or not I can actually go vote. Now, is that something that you can actually document and say, oh, this is the way people are feeling? No, but you can actually talk to people and they tell you that these particular things actually exist. And I think we have to acknowledge that.
Well, okay, fair enough. If any of those folks that have shared that with you would be willing to come on the program, I sure would like to talk to them. I'd like to hear from somebody that says, yeah, I tried to vote and I just couldn't. I was disallowed. I was blocked from voting. Because that's pretty serious. Well, I'm not sure what you're talking about. If it's an attitude, even if it's just a kind of a sentiment or an attitude or an opinion that they hold, if they feel like that, hey, the system really doesn't really want me to vote, or it's set up so that it's more difficult for me to vote, I'd like to hear from somebody that would make that statement.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's why, well, that's a good point and a fair ask. Most folks aren't going to want to do that. That's why folks like me are running who can represent their particular interests. Okay. So I can come in places like this and talk about their interests.
You understand, it doesn't really rise to the level of credibility when it's just hearsay and nobody's willing to step up. I mean, we're not going to attack them here. I just want to hear what they have to say. Because if that's actually happening, I want to fix it. Yeah. I got to tell you. So I'm sorry I'm out of time today. I'm sure we'll be talking more. Appreciate you coming on. Always enjoy talking to you, Shuwaski. Take care.
Have a good one,
Coming
buddy.
right back in the Element Well studio. Stay